I don't know if you follow that stuff at all. Like,
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
So what are you seeing?
A lot of people who want to bring people are bored at existing distribution of hardware, and they're like, there needs to be a new thing because there's a new software paradigm.
Okay.
And
when you say boarded distributions of hardware, is that largely like they're just tired of going to the Apple store?
yeah, it's just like, well, it's just they're bored of like, it's a phone, and the phone is simple and it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, there's new software, so we need new hardware. And it's like, well, the new hardware might be like very different things, right? And so it might not be consumer centric. The thing that AI enables might actually be different types of hardware that is for, like Planet was. Like it was satellites that was born out of these things, not other stuff. I don't think anyone has like the killer app beside I saw her and I have this idea that like this should exist. And it's like, our view on all the hardware stuff is if Apple is going to own the modality of how the input comes in, which you could say watch, ear, phone, and that covers most things, you're not gonna beat it.
Do you think those modalities are basically like the wheel? Meaning, like you can't really improve it. Like you can tweak it.
Yeah.
But like you can't. Like they're almost like the complete work. You can make some iterations to it. You can get the syncing better. You can get the sound quality better. You can get the camera more pixelated. But
you can get new utility though, right? You can add new devices, like new sensors to them.
Okay.
And so you can make them minimally. But it's like we're investors in this like EEG device company. But our main thesis was Apple won't own an always-on, like they won't have the closeness to capture brain activity because you need to have certain like endpoints of neurons firing.
Yep.
And like that's not going to be what they do for some long period of time. And thus like that's why we can even reason our way as to why this hardware modality exists and then why the utility comes from it. It's like Aura Ring for your mind in some ways. Plus you have longitudinal brain activity data set, which is helpful for biological purposes. We looked at a bunch of other stuff. Anything that can fit in AirPod form, no. Like any health thing you can get that sits close to these kind of markers, we're not gonna like step into that realm. And also it's like maybe it'll work, right? Maybe it's like levels, which is a fine business. But like if the need to believe is terminally these things get to 400 million a year in revenue, which is like ballpark where you need to be. If you assume these things trade at anywhere from 3 to 6 times on pretty good growth, which again, like that's a big assumption.
Yeah.
And you're gonna own X% of them to return a small fund for us. It's just like, good luck. So I think all the hardware stuff are like awesome art projects.
If you go back to when we were kind of deep into that hardware world, that was very much in like the maker moment. There were a few actual breakouts, right? You had the Ring doorbell, which wasn't an obvious thing. You couldn't put that on your phone, right?
But Ring was $1 billion exit.
Yeah.
No one funds that today.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Nest.
Yep.
Nest was 2?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that be fundable today, do you think?
I'll fund it, $73 million as my fund.
Right.
So if it exits for $1 billion, I own, let's say terminally I own 6.5%, 6%. Cool, fund basically returned. That's like the underwriting you have to make.
Yeah.
Who does the B with $1 billion fund where they're like, okay, so if I own 20%, this has to be a $5 billion outcome if I don't get diluted. And that's like the thing that people just don't seem to like fundamentally understand still in startups.
Where's the disconnect there?
I mean, I think the disconnect, like I think the big firms are like fully aware of the game they're playing. I think the disconnect
I know,
is
but I
the
think the
founders.
disconnect is with the founders.
Yeah.
I also think potentially the disconnect is with the seed and early stage market more broadly. Maybe?
Yeah, in what way?
Part of what started planting the seeds for Indie to me were years into investing, you start to realize like who your customer really is. And the kinds of companies you fund, if they require that much more capital, your customer is the next round of funding.
Yeah.
And so to your point, you can love a hardware device. You can see a clear path to $1 billion exit, but at the same time as the investor, you also know $1 billion exit doesn't move the needle for anybody at realistically, Series A and above.
Yeah.
And so the calculus of that approach to fundraising is just fundamentally different. And so, I think for me, part of the response on Indie was like, well, I think there's this kind of healthy, interesting ecosystem of businesses that on the surface might not look or feel that big, but also some of the biggest and most interesting companies we've seen have actually ended up breaking through whatever that floor or ceiling was we thought ended up actually just being a new floor. But when you think about the calculus on something like that. So say you do the company, you say, okay, $73 million fund.
Yep.
Our outcomes look wildly different. Like a
Yeah.
successful outcome for us looks wildly different.
Yep.
And candidly, like that's what seed was when we started it in 05, right? Like we can generate returns in markets where these big funds can't.
Mm-hmm.
But then pretty soon, the business model of running a fund is very compelling to have like the big funds following on, validating you. It's much nearer term than any kind of liquidity, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, how do you process that when you're making your investment? Because I know for me, I started to like feel part of the departure for Indy was like, okay, if we want that world to exist of these like interesting, adjacent, maybe niche types of things, then we've got to fund them differently. They got to take a different path.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I mean, I think if you're doing like large scale of ambition, deeply technical thing, like quite literally things that have never been done before,
Yeah.
outcomes should be large. You should be wrong a lot of the time, as you know. And so like that's what we do.
Yep.
We underwrite science, engineering, risk. What you then have to do is you say, okay, so can these things be really big? Cool. I'm pretty confident in where we spend time of robotics, machine learning, bio, crypto, some other weirder areas, like these things could be big. Then you have to be like, okay, let me work backwards of, is the ownership for our fund right initially? Cool, we can do all that math. And then from the founder side, the hard part is actually, how do you figure out like technical milestones and roadmap to raise later capital? The conversation I have most often with people building deeply technical businesses is there will be things you have to do at seed A that are adjacent to the optimal roadmap, but not core, that enable you to show things so that downstream investors either understand what you're doing or believe and will extrapolate the single data point to a much larger data point.
What would be an example of that?
So a great example would be Wave. Wave, we led the seed round. It was an end-to-end approach to self-driving. At the time, everyone was like, this is stupid. Waymo, Cruise have won this thing. It's like 2017. For the Series A, the core demo we showed was a car learning to drive in a day. So take a vehicle, no model, show imitation learning. Basically the car starts driving, it goes off path, someone stops, corrects it. The model learns very quickly how humans should drive and then drives around the track perfectly in 12 interventions, I think it was.
Wow.
Created a video,
Mm-hmm.
and that showed like a core principle, which was the underlying statement of today, self-driving cars are a variety of structured decisions that are made separately. You perceive the world, you plan a path, you go around that path, and there's a bunch of rules that relate to how you move in that path. That's Waymo and that was Cruise. This is like me and you can go to any city and get in a car and drive because we understand the principles of driving. And if you do that, you actually don't need all the rules. You don't need a perception to a path planning to a control. You don't need any of that. And that was like the most distilled way we could show a bunch of investors who thought the game was over. Waymo had won, Cruise had won, and the approach was hard to understand. Like no one knew it at the time, like Bayesian deep learning and reinforcement learning and end-to-end, all that stuff. And it wasn't exactly core to like what the roadmap was going to be for that company, what we needed to prove, but it was the like distillation of a lot of really complex ideas that enabled people to be like, okay, I get it. Series A investor led the A, and off we've been for a few years.
Clearly the response to it was positive. They got the Series A done.
Yeah.
But how did the entrepreneurs take that feedback? Were they open to it? Given that it wasn't kind of core to what they were trying to do, they were probably...
They are some of the more capitalistically ambitious hardcore researchers I've ever met.
Nice.
So they got it, and they understood that there was a disconnect between what they believed and what people perceived the world to be, which was this is solved, and them being like this isn't even close to solved. There are other founders that think what should be the world, how the world should work is investors should meet them where they are because they are the actual experts and they know. And the reality is like you're meeting somewhere in the middle, and your job as a CEO is to figure out where that middle is.
Yeah.
There are a lot of founders that are like, this is dumb. Why should I have to tell this stupid guy who like doesn't get this, or stupid gal who doesn't get this? Like, why am I dumbing it down for these people? They should come and meet me on what we're doing to understand what we're doing. So they're gonna give me millions of dollars. Like, shouldn't they want to know how this works? And I'm like, you'd be surprised.
I was gonna say, because at the end of the day, what do you think got that round done? The demo probably helped.
Demo helped, yeah.
Right?
The demo, the team.
'Cause that's a big hurdle to overcome. I mean, every entrepreneur has to walk into a room and say, okay, XYZ competitor,
Yeah.
How are you going to, they're already doing this.
Yes.
What are you bringing to the table?
The unfair point of that example is outcome is so asymmetrically skewed. Like it's very easy to be like, okay, if this works, it's tens to hundreds of billions of dollars.
Of course, right.
That enabled more risk taking on the A side. Other companies that don't have that large of like if this works, it's huge, have some problems where it's like, okay, the risk I'm underwriting has to be slightly different.
Yeah.
But that's where you get these companies that are like, Anand Sanwal is this founder and CEO of CB Insights, who's a boss of mine once upon a time. He calls it Ponzi scheme of ambition. He said Uber was a Ponzi scheme of ambition, which is you do cars, you do food, you do air travel, you do like the air delivery stuff, you do autonomous vehicles, whatever. And I call it like narrative rotations. There are founders who are kind of looking at that and they're like, okay, I need to have the thing. And I describe it as founders like you give them like the core story, which is the sundae, and then you like drop the cherry at the end, which is like, but also it could be these things.
Right.
And that's how you get around the like VC who's sitting on $1 billion is like, okay, I need to reason my way as to how I can tell my partnership this probably is like 5 to 10, but it could be a $100 billion outcome. That's how you get these kind of types of companies. But I think that there are, the other side of that is like the reality is there are also businesses that are starting under this idea of being the Schelling point for the thing that they're doing. So like SpaceX is the Schelling point for like private aerospace.
Yep.
Palantir is that for like defense, Anduril is that. Like there's more and more of those. And the idea is you're building this like entity that stands for a principle or an idea of a market, and you're going to figure out how to just like own and expand that over time.
So you sit at the headwaters of a lot of these emergent markets.
Yeah.
Unpack your approach to a Schelling point investment and a narrative rotation type of investment.
Try not to care about the narrative rotation part of it.
You love the narrative rotation part of it.
I do, but I think my view is the core business big enough to matter? Because like those things, the narrative rotation stuff is like what happened in 2020 to 2022.
Okay.
Which
what
is
happened
like
then?
Everything needs to get bigger, more, larger. We need more capital to do more things. We got to have more teams. And in reality, if you just build one thing in a massive market and do it really well, like especially in the areas we spend time, it's fine. It's like a great outcome.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of founders are not equipped to run like multinational organizations that have, not everyone's Zuck, that's fine. Like that guy's incredible.
Shocking.
Yeah, so I think the narrative rotation stuff people get like a little too roped into, and more it's like how do you credibly tell like that you're gonna own the version of the future you believe in, which is kind of the Schelling point thing. I'd say for that it's the core principle that I look at is like, is there a thing that everyone thinks is too early or ridiculous, there's no real customers, and you have to fund that in my sense. And so there's a few areas that we believe those are today. That would be a bunch of stuff that we've just talked about back then, where it was like, who's going to possibly build a launcher company that also does all these other things? This is 2004, right? Like, and so I think like the difficulty though is that people now with the AI boom everyone wants to like build some version of OpenAI, and I think VCs also like are looking at that, and they sometimes thus lose conviction on anything that doesn't have some narrative that looks like this $100 billion plus company. Like they just don't get excited, and their partnership doesn't get excited.
What happens when you get excited about it, knowing that the next round of capital might not be?
It's our job to make sure that the founders have a very strong ability to like communicate that vision and explain why what they're doing is meaningfully more important than people might appreciate.
Yeah. And
I think part of our job, like why we write so much, talk so much, do a lot of research, is we want the world to believe in what we believe like 18 to 24 months from when we believe it. Our research organization, like you could frame it as like like some sense of like a propaganda shop as well.
So do you think, there's two threads to pull there. One would be on the everybody wants to be OpenAI thing. Do you think that ultimately is the iPhone? Meaning like the form factor of the phone, it's going to be the phone. It's the adjacent stuff on the outer edges of those ecosystems that may end up producing like the bigger outcomes rather than tackling and reinventing the new consumer device head on.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you have to create net new things. Yeah. That's like tech today. We already did the like marginal improvement via software valued at 100 times revenue in 2020 and 2021. Right. And that doesn't work. Okay. So create net new things, 70% of them
Why did
fail.
that stop working in your mind?
I mean, interest rates, I think like terminal value of these things, like things revert to the mean, right? Yeah. And like if you just do simple math, you're like, okay, these don't actually grow in the way that people thought they would. Yeah. I used to talk to a lot of like consumer investors earlier in my career. I never got direct to consumer investing. I would ask them like, how do you think about making these investments? The question I would ask following up was like, how do you understand a brand or a company that's going to break past like 10 million in revenue? And I like never heard a single compelling answer to that question.
What were the non-compelling answers you heard to those questions?
It was always just, well, like you kind of feel it, like you see it, like I just like, you know, I've seen it a couple times. Yeah. But you're just, it's very easy to, it's not easy. It's very hard to build a $10 million a year business.
Right.
But impossible to build a $100 million a year business, consumer centric, whatever, and in general. And so I always tried to figure out how do these people who have like these hits after hits think about that and like the craft of what they do. My jaded answer of this is like the craft was not nearly as deep as I was expecting. Where if you talk to like people who are like very
So what would you attribute it to? Because they clearly had consistent hits. Just luck? Good networks? Good
I think
timing?
a moment in time.
Timing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cards reshuffle.
Yeah.
Acquisition channels reshuffle. People understand it faster.
Yeah.
But like I would argue none of them were hits.
Interesting.
What's Allbirds today? What's like Warby Parker? These things are traded 1x revenue or worse.
Right.
And so fine businesses, but like relative to capital raised, they're not that interesting. There's just a lot of dark art that sometimes, I think the opposite of that is you talk to like someone who does marketplace investing and they're like incredible like cohort analysis, understanding those types of like quantitative things where you see something and you're like, okay, this is a metric that like I scientifically understand means this is special. And I don't know if it's persistently special, durable, whatever. Some of these people I talk to are incredible at understanding that side of the business. I think each sophisticated investor has some sort of framework of how they understand what they do. And if it's vibes, then like you don't have alpha, you just have some form of levered beta on whatever the market does.
Yeah. Where do you, how have you constructed your framework? Because you have been at this, what, 6 years, 7 years?
My first seed investment was 2012.
2012, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But compound
Veteran at
since
this point.
2016.
Okay. But you mentioned, you know, you've now kind of, and I feel like I've watched this evolve, like you've kind of settled into your zone.
Yeah.
In terms of like how you develop your research, how you develop your theses. Thesis for you has always been pretty central to how you've thought about these things. So how did it start and how's it kind of evolved? Because now it seems pretty tight. Like you've got a tight time window you're building towards, you're trying to kind of come up with either a narrative or look at, you know, kind of core research to figure out what the world looks like in a kind of fundable time frame.
Yeah, I would say early on, the idea of deep tech was the insight maybe we had was that the time between commercialization and research was collapsing. And that was collapsing for a bunch of reasons. It was like on the human capital side, people were more and more disillusioned about like putting out more and more papers and wanted to actually see things in the real world. And I think we had a lot of like buildup of a bunch of industries that just never shipped anything, and these people were like, what am I doing with my life? I think autonomous vehicles is a great example of that. AI, people are going through that today, where I talk to people at these labs.
Was that a generational shift or was that just kind of a cultural shift?
I think cultural.
Okay.
Somewhat generational, but I think more cultural because people, I think when you're in, if we view San Francisco as like the hub for this, and I think there are others, but if we look at San Francisco, you are around all the other people who are also shipping things. And so you might be the person who you feel is doing a collection of very important work. In the 5 years that you have, or 8 years you've been doing research at Google Brain or whatever it was back in the day, you've seen mobile, you've seen cloud, and you've seen a bunch of other large, massive, like new entities built, and you've watched stock price go up and published a ton of papers.
Right.
And now, no more papers being published. Like if you're at big companies, right? It's like, hey, like there is no more attention is all you need. That is never coming out again in the AI world. We're not going to be like, here's this new novel framework, we figured it out. We believed that time was collapsing. That was like a core insight. We believed that if you understood the things on the research side, it would actually matter in venture. Most people, I think, prior to that would be like, this is cool that you understand what's happening in academia, wake me up in 10 years once it makes its way into the real world.
Right.
And then maybe I'll think about funding it 5 years after from a Stanford or Harvard grad.
Right.
That collapsed. That is now, I would say, more common wisdom. But there are arbs between what people believe could happen and the time in which it could happen to what we believe could happen and the time it could happen. And so I think we just kind of like look at these areas and we're like, okay, what are the futures we believe in? Let's be very specific about listing them out. Let's have internal views on a year-by-year basis of how we think this plays out. We published some of them. We published a crypto one that went year by year of what we thought would happen. 80% of them will be wrong. 20 won't. And
those 20 should be really, really right.
Yeah, and 2 of them will be very right.
Yeah.
Hopefully that means we can continue to deliver really
Of the
large
research
returns.
you've done so far, how would you bracket those? What was the 80% you got wrong?
Yeah.
Or an example of the 80% you got wrong, and maybe what's an example of like the 20% you got right that you're most proud of?
Yeah, the 80% wrong I would say is like probably the largest wrong piece would be like the robotics industry in general, I would say.
Been there.
Yeah, just like it didn't scale at the rate, it didn't move at the rate, everything. And there's a bunch of reasons why, but like I think it's actually the same mistake people are making yet again.
I was going to say, because it feels like there's a whole nother wave of interest and investment going into
Which
robotics.
is smart, I think.
Okay.
But I think the difference is that people are taking the same view that maybe we did years back. And
Which
we're like,
is what?
there are things in other adjacent areas and a cost compression coming down on the hardware side that means automation is going to happen at a faster and larger rate than we appreciate. And you get to the point where people, in 2018 would be like, what's like better than a robot, like a 5-finger robot, which is like a human, and you just do it, and it's not bad, and labor supports that. Now you have more labor pressures, you have actual intelligence instead of mechanical engineering that makes its way in. So like I get all of that and I actually agree with it, but I think people are doing a thing where they're like, the payoffs from AI directly will translate to robots. And so if 2016 to now was like this kind of squiggly line and then an inflection point on AI, I should just like move that to robotics and it'll be the exact same thing, because everything we know in AI now is this smooth brain view of like scaling. Scaling is all that matters, more compute, more data, larger models. I don't think it's going to be that easy. That we got wrong, and we got wrong also on some adjacencies of that, which meant like there was some value to be created. We had some companies that got acquired, some that died, but like none of them were huge. The stuff we got right, I think, was like believing that AI would matter far faster and in areas that other people didn't.
What did you see that maybe they didn't?
I think we looked at what was happening from a like principles perspective in AI in like 2014 to 16 even, of things like generative adversarial networks, which were like these clunky models that did like image generation. And we were like, these things are pretty good at actually being creative. Where if you were to talk to anyone back then, it was like, what gets done first? Like legal, like accounting. It was all the like binary feeling tasks. I would argue everyone was like, creativity is like what the human beacon is. Like we are these like.
So what did you see? Was there a demo? Was there a research paper? Like
just
what?
A pile of papers.
Fascinating. Okay.
More like every 2 weeks, out of University of Tokyo to Stanford to Apple had a team, like everyone. And it was like everyone thought this thing was really interesting and didn't quite know how to make it work properly, how to make it scale, how to deploy it in production. But it was like there are enough people that all think this thing is very, very interesting and it's working very well. And so we looked at that and we were like, okay, creativity as a concept will be enabled by machine learning and AI. And we made 2 adjacent investments, one in incubation and animation, one backing runway at seed. We think those have played out pretty well. Generally is the best pattern for when we see enough really interesting, weird things in research, do we believe that will accelerate to a point that people will want to pull it out of research and build a focused company around it? And that's where you get like a second inflection of speed of progress. It's like the OpenAI principle.
So how do you avoid, how much of that do you attribute to getting the bet right, and how much, like the theme right, and how much of that do you attribute to getting the people behind the theme right? Like, especially in crafting narratives, like it's very easy to get caught up in the narrative and in the like bigger wave and maybe compromise on the people.
I would say it's become harder because more people want to do deeply technical things.
Right.
I would say
so that's actually an area that I'd love to get into. It's I like you keep riffing on that, but that's an area that I think like that feels precarious.
Yes, definitely. To make it quick, like 2016 to 18 was only the people who could credibly possibly do these things would start companies.
Totally.
And
why do you say that though? Like what in their credentials, what in their
they had done something in the past, or they had a deep obsession that they had messed around with these things, that they were one of 100 people in the world or 200 people in the world. Like it was a known universe. The barriers to entry were high from like an intellectual perspective, an operational perspective. And so it was actually easier to look and be like, you're brilliant, you're definitely not a CEO. You're definitely not a founder. Like that was, it filtered so much faster. Now, as you see, like as things commoditize, more people look in, as things become more hot, more people look in, and people also start to be able to like tell the story and narrative of successful companies and like build a brand like them. I would say there's this like funny tweet that I've never sent, which I guess I'll say here, which is
Let's do it. Let's open up
if you
the
look at like
drafts.
tech Twitter, I would say there's 3 types of people, 3 types of founders. Everyone who either wants to be Sam Altman, Delian, or Nikita Beer. And I think those are like the 3
Those are the archetypes.
style archetypes
Okay.
are like so dominant now.
Okay, but
because of that,
like, so unpack each of those.
I mean,
if you
Sam,
can.
like brilliant, incredibly great at like creating maximum hype around everything that he touches.
Yeah.
So Sam did this Series A in Cruise, right? When Cruise was acquired by GM, Sam wrote a post. Sam used the word merger every time instead of acquisition. It was a $1 billion acquisition by GM, massive company. And he was like the GM Cruise merger, which is such an intentional point of view and choice.
Yep.
In retrospect, I think it was actually more
Because
correct.
the point he was making was what, in your mind?
GM needed this
Right.
as much as Cruise needed GM,
Yeah.
which I think is maybe like in the moment looked correct,
Yeah.
or maybe actually not. Like 3 to 5 years later looked correct. Now maybe less so. He continues to do that, right? Like goes on Lex and's like, "What's Q-Star?" He's like, "We're not ready to talk about that." He's just a master at doing these things,
Yes.
right? And so I think there are founders that want to create this air of like, I only do big things. And there's a very interesting sentiment that a friend of mine said to me the other day, which is at some point in the past 5 years, people realized that if you ask for $1 billion, you might end up with 200 or 500 million. And if you ask for 2, you're going to end up with nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that is like a very indicative view of like the Sam archetype.
Not 200 million, 2 million.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
But if you ask for $1 billion, like you'll get 200, right?
Right.
And so I think that's one archetype. And again, like I think Sam's incredible. Like
Yeah.
I'm very impressed by him. Delian is like a different one, which is like, I am me, I do things that matter, and has this edge and ability
And
to
if
like
you're not working
create-
on something that I think matters, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You're wasting your time.
Yeah, yeah.
Why even bother?
Yeah, and like my worldviews are continually like the definitive worldviews,
Yes.
right?
Delian's from my neighborhood. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like I deeply respect him. I
For
totally
sure.
get what he's doing. I
Yeah.
get what he's like what he's building, and his convictions are so like it's not an act.
For sure.
Not an act.
But like, if you look at both Sam and Delian in their own ways, both of them became these figures far ahead of any real success.
Oh, 100%.
And so that is like fascinating. They understood this game quite well and created this like very specific carve out, and like more power to them. And again, I think they both are impressive people. And then Nikita's this middle like shit poster, doesn't care about anything, tries like is effectively uncancelable, but actually is incredibly talented at what he does. And I just think that that's like a different archetype, but I candidly don't care about that archetype as much. It's like not interesting for a venture investor.
Because most of the stuff he's thinking about, talking about, working on are quick flips or smaller types of
I mean, his whole thing
ideas.
is like, do you want to like be cool or do you want to be rich, right? Like that could be a distillation. And he's like, I could be the person on panels talking about all these companies that I built, or I can just continue to do the thing I know how to do, which is make things grow fast and then sell them to people quickly.
Yeah.
And I'll make more money than by doing that multiple times over X number of years than the poor guy who had to work hard for 10 years and dilute himself 85% or
Right.
herself. It's like that's a vibe. I don't know if he cares about anything he does, but
So this all got started because we were talking about how the evolution of funding these kinds of companies has changed. Your point earlier was mid 2010s. The only people that were working on these things were actually like credible researchers, people who actually were practitioners of this.
yeah.
The filter was then around like, could they scale as a CEO?
Yeah. Were
Were they even intent on staying the CEO? Now you've got, I think it was our second fund. We had like this evolutionary graph.
Yeah.
Because we had, our pitch for OETV was like, the most interesting stuff starts with the hobbyist. So, you had the ape, and then then you started to get to like, you work through the primordial soup, and then there's like the engineer who's kind of like upright, but like isn't really, but then the upright, human that's when the MBAs show up.
Yeah.
Like that's when like the entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
and even back then, this was probably 2010. they weren't as well sculpted as they are today.
Yeah.
But today they're incredibly well trained.
Yes.
They know exactly how to hack the VC algorithm around that kind of combination of ambition, experience, pedigree, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So how has your filtering changed or adapted?
I think it's kind of one of personal aesthetic, honestly. Like there are styles of founders that I believe
you're
care.
back to the vibes.
I think I just believe care long term.
How do you tease that out?
How long have you been thinking about the thing you're thinking about, and how much have you stayed high conviction when it wasn't easy to do it? I also think another simplistic answer is just like, how hard do people work? If you see the most successful, it is such a not interesting conversation, but like the most successful companies work so much more than the less successful ones.
Why isn't that interesting?
Because it's just like
it seems obvious, but we don't talk about it.
We do, from someone on Twitter saying that once every 4 months, and then everyone loses their shit. But like, it's just like it's not interesting. But like, I think about, I go to the Runway guys around the corner from our office. I probably go to their office, I don't know, a couple times a month. I'll walk in on nights, say hi to Chris, whatever. Everyone's there past 9.
Yeah.
Like they're always on. That you can start to tease out how much people care, how much people know about the whole industry, not just the startup part of it too. On the research side, it's like, oh yeah, like I know about this team working on this at this lab. I understand like these types of things that could matter or couldn't matter. I think you just like get a feel for that quite quickly versus like, I believe that like this tool is very interesting for this problem and I want to be a founder to build this tool. Which again, like you actually might make a lot of money doing that. It's just not we won't get there, and that's fine. Like why we keep the fund small is because we want to only have to work on things that we care about and only need a small amount of outcomes to return lots of money to our investors. Yeah, could make a lot more money doing other things, short term.
On the fund side of things, Compound hasn't been the easiest thing to build for you. Meaning like these themes are just coming into vogue.
Yeah.
You were misunderstood for a long time. How did you keep your conviction, and how did you navigate the setbacks?
I think in a similar way with founders, like being okay with the ship going down if you did it the way you thought was best. It's like the number one advice I give to all founders. They're like, I don't know about how I feel about this. And I'm like, just do the thing that if the company fails, you can sleep at night knowing you did it. 2016 to 2020 I felt that, but I felt it in a somewhat scared way. Not scared, but a little bit like I hope this thing I'm saying actually is true. I think once we started to see some of the stuff that started working and some of the early beliefs we had really be validated, when we were and raised Fund 2 in 2021, it was like totally, we're gonna go down on the ship. Like this is not, I don't worry about this at all.
What was it that started to give you that confidence? Was it that LPs were responding differently to the story, or that the performance in the portfolio was like
performance probably?
Okay.
And also just like the early like nuggets of like this thing that I like wrote about many years ago was coming true.
Okay.
We could point to those and be like, look at this. Even then though, like the LP side, a lot of LPs, the main pushbacks are, so you believe you have all of these ideas and like you think you're going to be right on them. All canonical wisdom in venture is like, let the founders guide the future. There's a lot of arrogance in this statement. And we're like, well, we let founders fit within them or shatter them, whatever. And then second is like, these are all disparate areas and you have 4 people on your team and you are saying you're like some of the deepest people in these areas where we were backing firms with hundreds of people. How is this possibly true?
Right.
And I totally stopped trying to like, I just say like the need to believe is that we allocate our time better than most people in venture and we go deeper than most people in venture. And if you don't believe that, then like you will never get any of these things, and that's totally fine. Once you start sending distribution checks, that conversation gets easier. It still is, there are still some people who just like fundamentally won't align with that, and that's fine.
How long did it take you to get to that, to realize that? Because I think especially as a young manager, the initial reaction to that is trying to prove it to them, trying to convince them. When did that change for you? It sounds like Fund 2 maybe.
Fund 2 was definitely where we had more of a take it or leave it. Our entire view is like we show our work. You can go on the internet and find all of these things for you. I've been writing publicly on the internet for a decade now. I don't write, hey, I think AI is going to be big. I write, this thing matters for these reasons.
Very involved, yes.
And like,
research.
I think that, again, that was like my conviction on these spaces. And it's pretty incredible that if you do venture correctly, you only need to be right 2 out of every 30 times. That's why we are so precious about the model, right? Like the model has to be correct because that principle underpins a lot of what we do.
But interestingly, you came to venture from a bootstrap company.
Yeah.
How did you square that, your experience there, or what were your takeaways from that experience? And then how, if at all, does that translate for you into the work you're doing?
I think the bootstrapping part was more a like conviction on Anand's part of, is this big enough to warrant raising money?
Did he raise money while you were there?
He did.
That's right.
Yeah, he raised like a $10 million growth equity
fund,
round.
right.
In that moment, the view was we came to understand something about the budgets outside of the core customer being much larger, and thus we were seeing revenue ramp like pretty materially. A good like intellectual honesty of like, okay, this guy has a view of what does or should or should not be venture funded. And again, like 10 million bucks into a company that's doing a lot of revenue is like great investment for everyone. I think for me, the main thing that I took away at CB Insights was there was an obsessive group of people on the research team, and like all we did was care about reading and analyzing data and looking at it. And also I learned this muscle of like, for the first 9 months, me and Matt Wong, who leads Ribbit's research group now, would put out 12 to 15 posts a week. And so it just, you just got to this point of
insanely prolific.
Each, yeah. Of like wake up in the morning, see the data, build some charts, write, get it out. And so you like, 2 of them were, here's the data, like not very analytical, but it's, you got to build the charts, you got to look at it. One of them might have a little bit more analysis, and as we grew up as an organization, we started to add more. But it just gets you into like, how do I look at something? How do I understand? How do I translate that into some sort of insight as quickly as possible? So like everyone always asks about the writing. It's always like, you just learn how to do it, and you just do it quickly.
Geez, I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole, or we could go down the framework for what's venture fundable and what isn't. Which one's more interesting?
Oh man, venture fundable I think is like...
Yeah, okay, I think it has to be an interesting filter, right? Of having been, you were at that business, and I'm sure it's like a compounder. Like, it's probably not any kind of like massive breakout, but it's been compounding over the years.
Yeah.
So ultimately, like on a long enough time frame, that's going to be a great return for the people involved.
Yes,
in it, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. What's the heuristic for you?
Our heuristic is like purely one of, on a baseline basis, can an investment return our fund, which we do all the math of like, can it get to 250, 300 million in revenue?
Okay.
And an ownership-based model, blah, blah, blah. I think you then look at like, what we're doing, like often we are investing in markets that like sort of exist and we believe will grow much larger. Or if you can do this thing, then like the upward bounds are not understood well and have very high moats.
Yeah.
So we, I think, we need to have less of a sophisticated view perhaps, which again, I would argue we have a more sophisticated view than a lot of venture investors, but that's like a low bar, than someone who's doing enterprise software, where it's like, we're seeing just a total shooting stars of revenue across AI companies. We're seeing massive churn across a bunch of organizations. Like, I think that you have to be much more precise. The moment we start to try and reason about what does the market look like 8 years from now, if you can build a new type of diagnostic that feeds into like solving Alzheimer's or something, like I think you are mid-curving it way too hard. And we are like the ultimate mid-curve firm. That stuff we worry a little bit less about than people probably think.
Yeah. Given the size of your fund though, how do you think about cash efficiency, and if so, how? Right? Because we were seed investors in Planet. For the time, I mean, they consumed hundreds of millions of dollars, which now is like, nothing. Right? But a lot of these areas you're in are incredibly capital intensive, or can be.
This is the other thing LPs say is, okay, you invest in these capital intensive industries, and I'm like, show me all of the things that enterprise software or other dev tooling or infrastructure, show me how much money they've raised.
Yeah.
It's basically the same. Like yes, if you back SpaceX, it's capital intensive because the company has stayed private for 20 years. And also, by the way, you're still pretty thrilled about how that's going.
Yes.
These businesses are not materially less capital efficient than new types of tech businesses.
Does that surprise you?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, why?
Because a way to look at it is you spend more money up front to generate more durable revenue long term.
Right.
That's like a deep tech view.
Yeah.
Where you have to spend a smoother amount of money over long periods of time. I think the reality though is people don't really understand, once the machine gets going, it's like becomes very fuzzy exactly what dollars are flowing into keeping the machine growing. And so I think it's crazy that people have this view of software as the best business model ever. It's like, zero marginal cost, incredible margins.
And hemorrhaging cash.
And hemorrhaging cash, yeah. And so That, I think, is...
Do you think that's endemic to the business, or do you think that's just the way we've chosen to fund these things? Like, capital's been pretty abundant for anything that looks like it's working.
Probably more the way we've chosen to fund these things, but also just some of that like fuzzy view of any company that is remotely interesting now has 3 very well-funded competitors, where like in 2016 that wasn't the case. Also, that's because the like buyer of last resort, there was, meaning like a growth stage fund, there was like 4 of that could write these, like maybe 4 to 8, and now there's 30 at least. And so there's just more capital to fund more things to possibly compete on more axes, and that's where you get the Ponzi scheme of ambition thing. So I don't know if that stops.
Are you seeing and feeling that in these kind of, I think the term you came up with, it was frontier tech.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that more now? Like, I would imagine you were kind of a lone wolf for a while.
Yeah.
Or feeling pretty alone. There was probably you and maybe a handful of others that were kind of poking around the edges of some of these things. Are you now seeing that same dynamic emerging? Like, you'll find a market, I mean, maybe you're ahead of the curve, but eventually your company has 3 pretty adjacent competitors within 12 to 18 months of you funding them.
Yeah, it might be a little longer, but yeah,
Okay.
I think so. People also like deep tech now because it can't be comped to anything else.
There's a lot of narrative premium in there.
Yeah, I know software. I know exactly how much a software business trades at.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much a variety of different, I don't know what a bunch of different types of businesses trade at that we invest in. And that makes it easier for people to write more and more money. I said this before, like this is the lowest conviction time I've ever seen in venture amongst the industry. And so I think that that means once people glob onto like a view or an area, everyone else is like, oh, well, I don't really have anything I feel that passionate about. It's like, I should do that too. And that creates these like very strange dynamics of overfunding adjacent competitors or overfunding things that look but feel differently.
How do you see that playing out in like the day-to-day conversations you have with other venture managers? And then how do you see that playing out in returns over the next, let's call it vintage or 2?
Conversations with other venture managers, a lot of people are trying to like learn about these areas, but don't actually want to learn about the areas.
They want 101. They want like...
They want a framework that they can shove things into.
Right.
You just have a very poor misunderstanding of long-term value capture. And so I think that becomes complex where investors make bad decisions. And on the founder/company side, you see a lot of people who are building businesses with certain aesthetics. I mean, I think like the Segundo Boy stuff is like a perfect example of this.
The mullets, all the like periphery that has nothing to do with nothing.
Yeah, but it's like, it's a hard thing. It's pro-America. It's
mullets and eagles.
It's like some view that these things can generate real revenue. I don't know if like the technical underpinnings are what matter, but these are being viewed as technically innovative companies. You get to this point where it's like, well, science is like everyone knows what science is, and again, to the first thing I said, like companies that are doing things that have never been done before, and like creating things that have never been done before, and there are a lot of people that are building like interesting ideas with these core principles, but the innovation part isn't necessarily there, and so that means there's probably lower barriers to entry, less moats, and thus these things are less durable long term.
So as capital becomes less of a moat, what does?
Speed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Does capital have a direct correlation with speed?
I don't think so.
In these markets? No.
No, I don't. I think it's like there's minimum viable numbers. It wasn't that the capital that like allowed Runway to ship 30 tools in 30 days. They're pretty positive of that.
Yeah.
The team was 20 people at the time. I mean, Wave is another example. They are funded to the tune of 100x less than some of their competitors probably. I mean, like if you look at how much Waymo spends or some of these other companies, and or Tesla or something like, and I would argue, I think we'll be better. Yeah. So I don't think it's capital.
So how do you square that? I mean, just meaning when you look at your peers in venture, most of their energy, particularly at the seed and early stage, almost all of it is going into getting their companies funded.
Yeah.
The funding it might not be the unlock or the moat that they think it is. B, it might be a distraction from the core of like actually proving out the core business. Why are we so obsessed with it, you think?
Well, especially in deep tech, there's no milestones for success for so many years. So how do you know if you're doing something right? The market believes it. And how does the market believe it? They give you money.
Yeah.
You also do need very specific talent, which is expensive now. It used to not be as expensive. So you need minimum viable capital.
Totally.
But like, it's not, I don't know if you need the same amount of capital that some of these companies are raising like at seed now in AI. But I think you need some.
That's why we exist.
Yeah. But this is
Right.
this is the purest form. I mean, I don't know. This is like me loving myself too much, but like this is the purest form of venture capital, right?
Because
Like,
you're pretty self-loathing most of the time. I want you. I want you.
I know, but like this is the purest form of what venture is, which is like give money to people doing crazy things. Hopefully it works.
Yeah.
And the idea that there's going to be like a machine that just like continues to work as more money gets in, like higher output comes, is just like wrong. And so you do need minimum capital to compete. You do need some viability around like what the milestones are that allow you to raise money. Money is some signal for people believing, I don't know, every now and then you're going to have humane, and like that'll happen, and that's fine. I think maybe the AI stuff, the complexity is that people aren't really thinking long term. They're like, what's maximally interesting right now in AI? And like you actually need to have like very reasoned views around how do these things. Brilliance of Tesla has always been the master plan, right? And like that was a multi-step thinking, and a lot of people don't have the multi-step thinking, and that's where you end up lighting a lot of money on fire needlessly.
I think that was one of the hard. I mean, there were a lot of things hard about kind of standing up indie, but one of the hardest ones was convincing LPs that there was enough bleeding edge, cutting edge, interesting outlier types of businesses that could fit this profile.
Yeah.
Because, I think they would hear us talk about the kinds of things we were interested in, the approach we took, and they would say, oh, this sounds like a growth stage manager, this sounds like a private equity manager. Like my venture bucket is this crazy outlier bucket of risk. And you're talking like way too practically. That was and probably still remains a very hard hurdle to get over, although it became a little bit easier this last time around.
Right.
Yeah.
But as these technologies commoditize, you have these like windows where they feed into maybe like ideal versions of the indie model.
I mean, that's part of the longer term bet, right? Because my fear in going, not fear, but like one of my concerns, like we were investing in space in like 2010. Yeah. We were investing in robotics in 2012. We were pretty early to a lot of these categories, and I love that stuff. I mean, I remember meeting Ginkgo Bioworks. Yeah. They had like bootstrapped to like 10 million, like some crazy number of revenue before they took it, before they did YC, and now they're a public company. But like, there were all these orphan children in these industries where people were convinced they took gobs and gobs of money to get them to a point, and there were these like ultra scrappy entrepreneurs who'd found a way, and I think ultimately ended up with like much, much better businesses as a result of like that, the constraints they had on their business early on. Yeah. So, I think hopefully, part of the bet is like, we won't be stuck in like commoditized B2B, really predictable revenue land, but we can, that applying that framework to how you think about building your business is ultimately, could be a competitive advantage. And it feels so counter to like human nature. Right. Because human nature says if I can just get, that 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, like that's going to give me the capacity to hire. It's going to give me that mode. It's going to give me these things. And I don't know that it does. I think it kind of just depends on like what's the trajectory the company is on and the industry is on. Yeah. I would argue like if you're building a like foundation model centric business, like you need to, in the first 4 years, you will need to raise some order of magnitude of capital. No, I think that's right. And, I think that's part of, you just accept that. Like, there are just areas we're not going to be able to play in. For sure. And that's okay. Especially now that you're watching how a lot of those areas are playing. Like, if capital really is a differentiator, man, the incumbents are moving a lot differently than they did when, for the Web 2.0 types of companies. Yeah. I don't know if, but an argument would be venture capital has never been a differentiator, has never worked as one. What do you mean? I would say, there was definitely, say more about that. What do you mean? We had like a whole thing on this in our annual meeting in 2017, I think, which is like when SoftBank was doing like WAG and like those types of businesses. And it was like, if we just put a ton of money into a business, we can kingmake it. I don't think that's But I think that was accepted conventional wisdom and you would hold up, right? Maybe. Uber outraised, which allowed them to out-execute, which allowed them to win a market where Lyft is a distant second. Yeah, Uber might be the only example I can think of where that maybe is true. The other argument is they are just like, it was a fundamentally better culture for executing that type of company. For sure. And so I don't know if money is what enabled that culture. Look, I think, yeah, I mean, I think you're right on. I mean, I don't think money is the enabler or the moat for any of this stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like, why did it win? Because it had like this crazy culture.
Yeah.
And I think, but I think people are grasping for things that they can control and things that they can measure, and it's really hard to measure like the tenacity of or the culture of something that they have zero visibility into. But what they do have is crunch base.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, it's true. We see that. I mean, I think we see that in venture too, which is like, I would argue we, as a firm, garner less net respect because we raise smaller funds.
Why would you say that?
I mean, like, I just think that's like what I've seen borne out. Like, I think people
But
believe.
okay, borne out. So just how do you feel that? Like, how do you hear it?
I think if you are a founder and you see a firm that has raised a lot of money, you're like, this must be a better firm.
Interesting.
Where I can quantitatively say that's not true.
No, we've seen the numbers.
Yeah. So like, I think it goes both ways, and that's just the world we live in. And I don't think.
Okay, so how has your approach to that entrepreneur changed, if at all? Your approach to the LP was like, look, we're for you or not.
Yeah.
We're not going to try to convince you. That founder, you're never going to convince. I mean, I don't know. You tell me. How's it?
This is why we do so many things like publicly, is we just say, like, it's awesome that this person says they're excited about AI, but like, go back. We have like 10 years of writing on this. Enjoy. If you want to work with us, that could be great. And we view a loss as if we get within like 25% of top price and a founder doesn't choose our term sheet, that's like a loss for us.
Okay.
If it's larger than that, we're kind of like, this is just a different game. We're not playing it.
Like, what's an example of a loss? I mean, because clearly if you're not even playing, if it's just, if the quantums of capital are so different.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine that's the case too. Like, you meet somebody early.
For sure.
You're crafting a $2 to $3 million round for them. And they're like, oh, XYZ firm just came in with $20 million on 3x the valuation.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in that situation, if you love the company, you're participating more like an angel or doing like a couple $100,000.
Yeah, probably not usually.
Yeah.
I mean, I think our approach is just like, we both understand that every time you sell shares of your company is the most expensive sale you will ever make, that you feel at least. And
do founders get that? In your estimation?
I think they do more now, yeah.
Interesting.
I think so, but I think I say that, and thus that is a counterpoint for why they should take our money, because we probably are not going to be highest price.
Yeah.
So I think the counterpoint is like, this is all the stuff. It's long, you want to work with the right people who have the highest context, who care, blah, blah, blah. Our view is like, the things that venture investors are actually helpful on is being very high context and being equity compensated therapists 50 to 70% of the time, and like very strong confidants 30 to 50% of the time. That's the core thing that matters for the early stage. We don't have a platform team, like we're never gonna do that. I just don't think it matters. Some founders are like, I've seen this before, I get it, totally. Some are like, I totally get that, and this is why I'll take your term sheet at a slightly lower price. Yeah. Again, we still pay with the market, like we play these things, but and others are like, I just don't really give a shit about any founder or any VCs, so I'm good. And I'm like, cool.
Is that an increasing, is that last category, is that a growing, shrinking, neutral?
I think as VC has become more institutionalized, it has become more of a truth that these people don't matter.
Wow.
And if I'm a founder and I look at the world and I log into Twitter, I go to events, I am unfortunate enough to be on like the newsletter of a VC firm, I might be like I can figure this out. Especially because you're a founder, you're inherently a little overconfident because you're trying to do something so hard, right? Yeah. And so I totally can see how someone would come away with that view.
What's your most compelling argument against that?
Talk to some of our founders. Like,
okay,
that's kind of the
yeah.
I don't have like again, I think that's like a net correct view in many cases. I just think like for certain types
Vinod would say they're all bad.
Yeah.
Except him.
Yeah. I mean, and everyone says this. This is like, the other thing too is every VC believes they are doing the most pure form of venture capital at all times. And then there's a cohort that actually are not disillusioned at all, and they're like growth investors, and they're like, yeah, our job is to have a misunderstanding of price that other people don't, and we'll underwrite to that. Yeah. And like, I respect that too.
Yeah. But one of your themes that fits into venture capital investing is also crypto. And you guys you've been pretty prolific in it. So I'm curious, you've also kind of ridden the whole, you've ridden now at least multiple cycles.
Yeah.
How did that get introduced into your framework of research and investing, and kind of how if at all, has your approach to it evolved over time?
Yeah, 2015 started to see a weird collection of people building stuff. Thought it was kind of interesting.
Any of those like stand out as most formative?
For me, honestly, no, because I was being dragged into it from like other smarter friends who were like, "This is stuff's interesting," and I was like, "I don't know."
You were going kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I was just like, "This is like like anytime you see a collection of people doing weird things, I'm like, I want to understand it."
Totally.
But in 2015, I was like, I just don't really know if people want to live in a world in which there's no like person of last resort to deal with, like the self-sovereignty, the trustlessness. It was a little weird to me.
Okay.
I grew up in the Northeast in America in like a middle class household. Why would I believe anything different than like everything is fine in the end world, right? 2016, it was like, okay, there's like a lot of interesting primitives happening here. And our view
What kind of people were getting attracted to it in 2015, 2016?
cypherpunky types, some people who didn't grow up in the United States, right? There's like that part of people. I'd say most of it was like early Ethereum people.
Okay.
I always like knew Bitcoin. I always thought it was like kind of interesting but kind of crazy. And in 2016 we saw this and we were like, okay, if what we do is like get to spaces early, understand them, we should start to understand this. So we made a collection of investments from 2016 to 2020 in Compound One with the view of like
and what did those look like? How did you decide?
Seed investments into like interesting protocols that we thought were like, our view was like, if we're going to do this, we want to do like the native version of it, not the like Web 2.5e stuff, because that's where we think we'll have the most learning.
Okay.
That's where we think there's most asymmetry. And we also backed a couple funds that were like very, very native, and we got to spend time with them.
Okay.
That looked like we did the seed round for the Graph, for Dapper, for Blockstack, Arbitrum, Compound, Decentralized Finance Protocol, a bunch of others. And I think what we saw was incredibly technically interesting. Like the technology was very unique. The people were wild across both sides, like awesome and not. And in 2018, it was like exploded. I looked at our portfolio.
Was that just building towards the explosion of 2018, or was that the liquidity? Was that the interest
ICO
rate?
stuff.
What's that?
The ICO stuff just like it went out of hand.
Okay.
And it was also just like, we invest in these things being like, this is deep tech. This is going to take 7 to 10 years. That's kind of what we thought. And the crypto world was like, no, this is now. And so 2018, this happened. I don't know, in like 2019, I was like, okay, well, that was crazy. Like this might not come back. And I looked at our portfolio, probably down like 90% from where we invested. And our view was like, maybe this will come back and be interesting and work. I don't know.
Yeah.
Continue to pay attention. I'd say like more back half of 2019, kind of like re-engaged. DeFi happened. Compound in our portfolio is one of the core kind of catalysts for that. Robert Leshner like invented liquidity mining basically, and DeFi Summer happened, and then a bunch of other things happened.
Yeah.
2021, the world was bored and speculation was crazy. We leaned out a bit then, and I'd say 2022, once things collapsed, we kind of reaccelerated, brought Smack on full time to focus only on crypto. And our view is like with each year, I mean, 2016 is hilarious. It's the year we got into it. 'Cause it's also, we had a very polarizing election that year. Mm-hmm. And I think every year after that, there has been more and more things that happen in the world that only support the principles underpinning what we think is interesting about crypto.
Mm-hmm. How was it trying to carve out either allocation or understanding in a traditional venture fund for crypto in 2016? I mean, it feels like maybe some awkward conversations with LPs.
Yeah, we sent a notice to LPs like, hey, we're changing our LPA to enable us to do this. They were like, this is all like Bitcoins for like selling drugs on the internet. Like this is all scammers. Why are you guys doing this? And
right.
We were kind of like, listen, we're not going to allocate tons of money out of the fund to do this. 2018, they were like super amped. Then they forgot about it. 2021, they were like, why don't you raise a dedicated fund? Why don't you do more?
That's right. Did that happen or no?
No.
Okay.
And then 2022, they were like, this is all a scam. 2023, they're like, this is interesting. Now there's a split. We do the thing that we're happy to like go down on the ship on. And we think crypto is one of the most like asymmetrically skewed to the upside areas, and a lot of it won't work and some of it will. I also think the like sophistication around like building long-term durability in that asset class is very poor. We try and take a view that that's where the world we're going to operate in. Mm-hmm. But every now and then things like meme coins happen and we just kind of sit there and...
I was going to say, because I think you have a fairly tortured relationship with the culture around crypto.
Yes, yeah.
Why?
It's a lot of not serious people. But it's,
You didn't know this going into it when you were looking at apes and punks and
we weren't looking at it. But to be honest, in 2016, it wasn't. It was like crazy people, which is great.
right.
Like that's what you want. And then 2020 kind of tilted that, and I think also there's like a lot of money, and I think some of it's very sophisticated and some of it's very not. The dynamics of crypto means it's as oriented around long-term durability sometimes, and that's something that we
has that informed how you participate in it? Like, I know personally you've done a lot of like trading.
Yeah.
Does the fund do trading now?
No.
Okay.
No. We own some liquid assets, but we don't trade them.
Okay.
No, I think for us, we are happy to lose money backing something that we thought would matter a long time. We are not happy to lose money backing something we thought we could like flip for like a 5 to 10x in 18 months.
So what do you think matters now? Like, what are the high level themes for you in crypto?
For us, it's like weird, like middleware and application layer.
Okay.
Infrastructure is actually where most people make their money. We think that eventually that will change, maybe similar to the commercial to research collapsing of time. We think we are early to this shift. So weird middleware that can be built upon a lot of decentralized finance stuff, a lot of the like decentralized physical infrastructure stuff, things that are net actually more efficient than what exists in the real world, and or things that actually are net better for the real world, even with the idea that they are maybe like disruptive to existing incumbents. So like decentralized energy is like a core example of that. And these like virtual power plant networks and stuff like that we think is really interesting because the energy grid's fucked in the United States on a long-term time horizon. I'd say those are like the core themes, and as time goes on, we think there are maybe other speculative themes like decentralized science that could be very interesting as well, but we have to have very strong views around like value capture and value accrual. That is venture scale, where in crypto one could argue if you don't invest in new blockchains and new block space, the venture scalability is more of a question.
What's the culture of crypto look like right now? The composition of characters that are in that orbit,
I think,
or the fundable orbit.
I think I'm less in tune with the cumulative culture of crypto. I think a lot of meme coins. There's a lot of AI crypto people.
It seemed like there were people like YOLOing into this stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Even funds.
Yeah, for sure. Again, like we do the things that we are happy to go down on the ship with, and that type of stuff.
You're not going down on the ship for dick butts?
Yeah, like you definitely can go down. Like the ship can definitely go down, and actually you might make a ton of money. Like
totally.
But I think there's a difference between building a firm versus building a fund.
Yeah.
If the entire view is how do we optimize this single moment in time fund, maybe we would be like, I mean, Smack on our team is like pseudonymous, very in that world, understands it very well. Me and him talk quite a bit about a bunch of these dynamics happening, and sure, there's ways we probably could make money doing it. But if you're wrong and you lose money doing it, I think it's not what people give us money for.
Yeah. I always felt like there was a real, maybe I'm wrong, but, maybe the narrative isn't as strong as I thought it was, but like it always felt kind of antithetical for crypto projects to take on so much venture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ideal promise of crypto would be structured as you raise 1 to 2 rounds of private financing because you're doing something insane.
Yeah.
You then figure out how do you incentivize your community long term, usually with the token. Complexity is that nobody locks the tokens for long enough. And so you incentivize people, but not for the long term. And so
they're generally locking how long?
I mean, it's,
if at all.
It's varied. What I would say like normal structure is you lock for 4 years post token genesis for the VCs in the team. You vest 25% after year 1, and then you like linear unlock per month, kind of like an option vesting for an employee.
Right.
But you also get staking rewards. Sometimes you can sell those immediately. You sometimes will have teams that have very low float of their tokens, so the price is really high, and the community basically just has like immense sell pressure for 4 years, which if you were building Stripe and every month a new person could sell their shares and like the share price of Stripe might go down, and that would disillusion a lot of people, as we've seen in other companies when these companies have been recapped over the past 12 months, and talent would leave and then the thing wouldn't get built.
Yep.
And so like illiquidity is a feature for long-term innovation. People don't agree with me though.
Why? What's to disagree with?
These things can be built faster. Communities should own more of them. They should be traded, blah, 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 which is fine. Like I get it. We have sub 5 multi-billion-dollar application protocols in crypto today, like at
Sub 5.
application.
Yeah, which would be
It's
what?
sub 5. So it'd be Uniswap would be the biggest one.
Yeah, that's right.
You would have Lido, which is like 1.1 fully diluted or something, 1.3. And then you would have Helium is now sub a billion. You have Hive Mapper, which is like a decentralized physical infrastructure thing.
Yeah.
A few. The other data point, which is insane, is there are, I believe, I don't have hard data on this, I believe there are 3 tokens that were venture backed and have made it past their previous all-time high post full unlock.
Wow. That's a funny number.
Yeah. And so what that means is that VCs have never realized more value post unlock on an investment than, except for 3 times.
Than their entry point, their entry price.
Not their entry price, but from the day the token launches, right? So take token launches, like retail can now buy this thing.
Yeah.
Price goes up because there's minimum amount of tokens, bull market, whatever. Tokens unlock for 4 years. Okay, so you start the clock now, it's year 4. It's a free market now.
Yeah.
This thing is fully valued based off of a fundamental understanding. It has, in 3 token cases, it has been a higher price. Again, value is different because it's
wild.
circulating
3
supply.
times.
3 times, from my understanding.
Yeah.
It's a short, the counter argument, we've only really had crypto since 2018 at scale. But it would be as
Do you
if,
buy that counter? I mean, sure. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But is there enough value getting created in these things? Like what?
I think there will be long term, yeah. But I think like it would be as if Microsoft was like just the chart was only down since 2004.
Okay, we talked about this a little bit off camera, but now that we're on, there was an interesting conversation around like the heuristics around valuing these things and maybe the generational approach to it.
Yeah.
You kind of sit in between, right? Like you generationally kind of sit in between. You're you're in your 30s. There's like the 40 plus set, or 50 plus set that's currently managing, and then there's these kind of new up and coming managers or ones who are just starting to ascend in their early to mid 20s.
Yeah.
What impact do you see that having on kind of valuing these things, or informing your own framework around how to I mean, we invest early enough. I don't imagine you're getting that involved in building a model, for kind of how these things get valued over the long term.
No, but we do hold quite a bit of liquid assets that have now unlocked.
Yeah.
And so we do have pretty strong views of what fully diluted values we think these should hold based off of a variety of things.
Okay.
I think that crypto trades on some sort of, like if traditional companies are built on a DCF model of discounted cash flows on some period of time, and the period of time grows and shrinks based off of risk-free rate, which is like how generally people fundamentally view these things. Crypto trades at a longer duration with more of a premium built on maximum optimism of the protocol. And so I think you have to believe in the long-term vision, because theoretically, anyone who holds these tokens is bought into some vision of these things. It's not true, but that's the theoretical view. And so there's narrative premium. And I think narrative premium has made its way into all markets. Crypto, you feel it the most, you see it the most because conviction is much lighter there. It's much less understood of a market. So you have larger price fluctuations, you have much less sophisticated players, much smaller dollars, whatever. But in equity markets, you see the same thing. I think as we talked about,
And you think it's a generational thing that's driving this?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
It's just people care about different things when it comes to businesses, right? Durability and predictability was a big thing 2 generations ago. Why would you go work at a startup? You can get your job, get paid, get a pension, have a house, do the thing. That's great. Durability is what we care about.
Yeah.
Now it's asymmetry, and that might be socially. People feel like they're trapped, and unless they go big, they go home. It might be a decade of 0 interest rates and bull market runs, and it might be this time truly is different, and there's this technological shift. We are just getting started, and you'll talk to someone and they'll love to quote cloud penetration in the enterprise and how we're still so early, and AI is going to be a massively deflationary technology, and thus all these other exogenous factors don't matter.
Yeah.
You can reason your way around all of it. Our core view is these things are incredibly important. They will be the core, most asymmetrically skewed to the upside areas are biology and crypto, and those are enabled by two different things, but that like you should underwrite in that way, and that's why we spend time on them.
Okay, I just looked. We've been going over an hour. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I have to shoot a text really quickly though.
We're so close to actually killing a camera battery.
What are you disillusioned with right now? Anything? What are you excited about right now that maybe you don't think is getting enough attention?
Let me send this email one sec. What am I disillusioned with so much? Just like the craft of investing and company building is probably the stuff that continually I think about, and I'm just like, this is like exhausting.
Why?
Because people don't care. People don't treat it as a craft. I think it's probably the main reason.
What's at the root of that, do you think? And why do you think it matters?
It matters because all venture and building companies are all decaying things. And so you have to outpace the rate of decay. And thus, if you don't have that view, people actually view venture as a compounding thing, which is what pattern matching. I don't need to be as sharp or as good or whatever because I've seen so many of these things, I can pattern match and I'm like good because of that. When in reality, it's like actually these things change so quickly that you're just decaying if you stay with your framework. And I think that means you have to have like a craft of, like some of the best people I think are people who try to understand all parts of the stack of technology. Not like the stacks, but like the people who at different age groups, the investors at different parts of the financial stack, the companies at different scales. Think about like Andy and Fred at USV, like they hang out work-wise with like people much younger than them and people older than them and people their age and people building companies at different scales and investors who are public market investors, private equity investors, pension fund investors, small angel funds, seed funds, whatever. And they like
everybody. They're just a huge funnel, huge top of the funnel.
Well, they just know them all. Like they care about understanding why these people believe the things they believe. That's like
you
craft.
Don't see that same level of
no shot.
Why?
That's hard.
Do you think it's just like
it's tiring?
What's that?
It's tiring. It's hard. It's hard work.
Venture, like who was attracted to it over the last 10 to 15 years? Potentially weren't serious people either.
Yeah, but they were at least passionate. Like I think there's a large number of people with passion, a large number of people now as things institutionalize with less passion, which is fine. It happens. Like there are bankers in venture now.
Yeah,
it's cool. But it's just again, like if you don't, there's also a world of people that don't accept, or that all they want to do is not accept some of the realities of these things, and like that's why I don't know. That's why I'm like less combative theoretically on Twitter now, is because I'm just like, who cares? Like you just have to you have to accept the reality of the world and not like complain about the other things, right? So it's like,
did you catch yourself at one point complaining and you're like, I don't want to be that
I mean,
person?
I still do that a lot. Yeah, I just think it's kind of like when you see people complaining about YC prices on Twitter. It happens.
Yep.
I don't know.
Right.
What are you gonna do?
Right.
That's why I have this view of like, if we get
if you just gave away 7% of your company for 150K, you'd be trying to get maximum price too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And and they like that's where the market settles.
Totally.
So play the game or don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's fine. Like we invested $8 million from September 2021 until January 2023 out of a $73 million fund.
Wow.
And so like sometimes you just got to be like, we have to play our game.
Right. When you think about honing your own craft, then who do you like? Are you learning from someone, a group of people, or are there like, I don't know, where do you? How do you refine it?
Yeah, it's like a neural network. You like pull in all the data and then it trains based off of some composition of those data sets, right? So it's like spending time with people who are smarter than me in areas, spending time with people who have done this for a long period of time and seen the changes.
Yeah. Spending
time with people who maybe I think have ridiculous opinions, but trying to understand why or how. I also think you lose a lot of I told this to our team, which is like when you are earlier in your venture career, and like from a time perspective, I hopefully am, but from a brain damage perspective, maybe less so, you have a naivete of like, these founders could become great. And then you spend time with greatness and you're like, shit, this is so, like that's so hard to get there. Yeah. And it makes it harder to find the early people and be like, these people could become great. And so it's also like continually retraining, like, I would argue the more, as you're like running a firm, the more you are on these really late stage, highly sophisticated boards and the more percentage of your time where you're spending time with people who are operating at that capacity, it can erode your ability as an early stage investor to spot like weirdness and back it. I would say, like, again, to talk about him again, like a close friend of both of ours, I think Andy Weissman is like incredible at loving weird and imperfection. And I think that's like seeing the weirdness and like continuing to love that, and seeing the imperfection and continuing to love that is like what a version of a craft is.
When you say, because I remember being at a board meeting once, and this very conversation came up, which was this, you know, early young team was trying to make an executive hire.
Yeah.
And you know, they brought in a couple examples of people that they were interested in bringing on, and you know, a fellow board member who's, you know, much further ahead in terms of like age, experience, and also just success level was crazy. Candidates left, door closes. First thing out of his mouth was, "You haven't seen what great is." So you're entertaining a bunch of like good, but you haven't seen what great is.
Yeah.
When you talk about Andy, any other examples of people who just like totally reframed in your mind, or gave you at least a hint of what great looks like, to help filter by, filter.
Yeah,
through?
I mean, the stuff we've talked, like Alex Kendall at Wave, guy's insane. At one point during COVID was living in New Zealand, operating Monday through Friday on UK hours because his team was there. He was home with his family. And then Saturday to Sunday would flip so he could spend time with his family, and then Sunday night stay up to flip back to UK time.
Yeah.
Chris Alejandro Anastasius at Runway, obsessed with the problem, care about the craft of the art, whatever. Mark Alcori, who runs a company called AI Fleet, like in the trucking world and just like obsessed with it, spends all his time thinking about it. It's founders mostly. And then I think there are investors who care about, the craft.
Was there an indication early on when you were looking at these companies for the first time that hinted at that greatness?
Obsession, yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Depth and obsession.
Yeah.
I think it's all that. That's how we look for hires. Are you like so obsessed with what we do at Compound, the style in which we do it, the areas you spend time in, that like otherwise you'd just be doing the same thing?
Because I know you kind of struggled to hire for a little while.
Yeah, it's awful. Still trying to hire. Yeah.
Why is it still awful? Your brand is way bigger than it's ever been.
Yeah, but we wrote this in one of our job postings. Like, I think day to day working at Compound is very fun. Like, we are all the nerdiest of people, and like we spend time obsessing about all these things. We talk about it, try things, whatever. But the like principle of working at Compound is maybe less fun, which is like you don't get to yeet a ton of money. You have to be like very disciplined about like what you're doing. You maybe have to have a subset of areas you focus on. You don't have infinite aperture. You have to like put your views out into the world and have people be like, "You're a fucking moron." No.
Right.
There's some set of people who are like, "Why would I do that if I could, like, if the..."
Just go rip checks into my friends' companies all
Again,
day and tweet.
And that could make a ton of money. Like, that could work.
Totally. It probably has worked.
It definitely has worked. I don't know. It's hard to be like we have a very high bar. We are like slacking at 10 to midnight, 5 days a week, probably.
Yeah.
So I think we just are maybe a little less like some of the other firms in that sense.
You and I have always talked about like being experimental and weird in venture, trying different things. I know, when we were mid-indie, you were always like, I don't know that I agree with it, but like you're trying a bunch of like really wild stuff.
Yeah.
And that was always like, I appreciated that you saw that and that encouraged it.
Yeah.
What do you feel like have been the kind of wildest experiments you've tried within Compound? Not just not investments, but like things you've tried to do. I mean, obviously all the research is like very differentiated now. And I'm sure for a long time it wasn't appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't know how much. I think for us, it's like some sort of a calling card. I don't know if it's meaningfully appreciated, but we have like a thesis database that we kind of like finally were like, okay, we have all these ideas of things that should exist. Why don't we just like throw them in a database, let people see them? That's been helpful because people will be like, I can't believe there's someone else thinking about this, let alone someone that runs a venture fund.
Yeah.
We have zines, which were like started with as an LP thing because we write these long letters to our investors, and some of them didn't know that we published research even. They were like, where is it? And it's like on the internet, and he was like, can you mail it to me? And so
That's amazing.
one of them we mailed at the end of the year, and he was like, this is awesome. I read it on the plane.
Yeah.
And now we do that for a bunch of people. We did like a grant program for crypto in 2016, which was people building dApps on tops of the protocols we had backed. We would grant them like single digit thousands of dollars. But there's like a lot of, I think the funniest thing to me is in venture, some of these firms have infinite budgets. We certainly do not. And there's so little experimentation on that stuff. It's like
Wild,
dinners.
right? Like
and-
unlimited resources.
Yeah.
Zero creativity.
Yeah. Like if I was running a massive firm, I would just build like a version of Arc Institute, which is like a large research organization, and attach it to the firm. And I wouldn't even try and say like it's an incubation arm. I'd be like, these are just interesting technologies that we think not enough people are focusing on. We're going to try to bring them in to like spin up these MVPs of these things and then like open source them to anyone who wants to build companies. And like, hopefully because we've done this, you'll take our money.
Did Andreessen do a little bit of that with the crypto stuff or no?
They do some like really interesting development on the crypto side, but it's more like small, talented teams. They do some of it though. I'd say like 50 Years is another fund. They do a grant program, a few different types of scientific grants.
Yeah.
Moth Fund, which is a much smaller fund, Molly, she does these like tiny grants for really young people who need like a couple $1,000s to build something. I think that's super interesting. I mean, there's all versions of like grant money to give people, but fail case for Compound is actually the opposite, which is like we get 2 in our fields about all of our research, and we just sit in a room and write a bunch of blog posts and like never make good investments.
That's what I was trying to get at earlier. Like it's very easy to get high on your own supply sometimes,
for sure.
and to be more enamored with ideas than the individuals executing on those ideas.
Definitely.
You can be absolutely that. In the early days of OATV, that's what I would say to our investors. Like, we will always be directionally correct.
Yeah.
Will we get into the company that owns it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, like, I think these mega trends and these shifts happen, and if you're good, and you're plugged in, you can spot them fairly early on. You can start making early bets, but these aren't markets that you always have to be the first mover in to win.
No, sometimes final.
That's right. You've written a little bit about that.
Yeah.
What's your anything you'd?
My view is in this world in which there's so much capital, once something becomes moderately consensus, you want to do things that feel very weird. I don't think anything's non-consensus anymore. There's too much money. Feel very weird, and maybe that's because the founders look a little different. Maybe it's because the company looks different. Whatever, but you have conviction in it, or you try and look at something that is at some sort of scaled penetration, scaled consensus, and take like an orthogonal approach to it and back that as something that could be truly like displacing or destructive to the incumbents or like the scaling incumbents. The example for that today would be like backing an AI lab that is not doing something with transformers or something like that. I don't know if that's a great example, but
is there any canonical example from the past you would point to? I mean, besides like Google or something like that.
Yeah, I mean the early stuff would be I think a bunch of the companies we've talked about because it was. I mean, the Runway guys are an interesting example just because they were 3 immigrant founders from NYU in the design program.
Right.
Like, they're not Stanford people. That, I think, was a team that didn't look like everyone wanted them to look like, category that people thought wouldn't be interesting, and they just out-executed everyone, in my opinion, and will continue to. Wave would be final mover. Different approach, totally different technological structure. And there's a bunch of other kind of like leapfroggy type dynamics in other industries, but those are ones that I most intimately know.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut. We really have to cut off. Maybe like.
We're at 2 hours.
It is getting a little ridiculous. It's getting a little ridiculous because we could keep going another 2. But